Hello, I'm Mishka, and this channel is the Helsinki Renaissance, where we will be talking about arts and culture in hopefully a very inviting sort of a manner. Now, anyway, I did that video about Edgar Wright's top 1000 favorite movies, or I believe I called the video something like Irishmurdoching Edgar Wright's 1000 favorite movies, where it's sort of debatable whether it is that I actually Irish Murdocked the list, because if the Irish Murdocking process really should be something like looking at Mr. Wright's list as I did and feeling as I did, that there's not enough Asian movies out there, for instance. It's just it would have been more Irish Murdocker of me to try and sort of balance the list into having sort of different tonalities to it. But, well, partly I sort of tried to do that. I tried to, add a couple of films from the spots of the cinematic map that weren't there, but really I sort of did try to stick close to the tonality that Mr. Wright established throughout his selections. So it's almost as if I only halfway tried to Irish murder it. I tried to, introduce a bit of more golden age filmmaking in terms of Scaramouche and a bit of, silent cinema more there with the Benjamin Christensen film, and just another Asian film there with Save the Green Planet and a bit more art house and whatever, and so it's as if I halfway tried, but like it's a strange situation. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that I was too polite, and I liked Mr. Wright too much to Irish Murdoch the way that people usually Irish Murdoch. So make of that what you will. But anyway, so I made that video. And in that video, I made some mention of the idea that perhaps I should do another video discussing some of my ideas, or some of my sort of private relation to the Edgar Wright top 1000 list or something, or whatever it is that I said. Well, now I'm doing this video because of me saying something about needing more time in an altogether new video to talk of stuff like this. So anyway, after recording that video, I went and counted how many films I had seen from the Edgar Wright top 1000. And, initially when I was going over the first, films from the silent era and 30s, 40s, 50s, it looked really good. I had like a completion percentage that was something like 95 or something. But then when Edgar Wright started transitioning away from the kind of standard classics like White Heat, All About Eve, In a Lonely Place, Los Olvidados, Sunset Boulevard, Rashomon, High Noon, Ikiru, Singing in the Rain. When he started transitioning around the 113 mark, where Gleno Glenda by Ed Wood makes appearance, then pretty quickly around the 137 mark, when Val Guest's The Quatermass Experiment starts appearing, then the kind of films that I already haven't seen from 1955 onwards that are just, such quirky choices like The Quatermass Experiment 1 and Quatermass Experiment 2. I just haven't seen some of those because I don't think they've been really made available. So my completion percentage on the Edgar Wright list starts dropping drastically, or well, it doesn't start dropping drastically. It's still respectable for quite a while, but like if it was something like 95% in the first 100, where it was only some sort of a really rare, was it, wait, I'm trying to see, something like a Dorothy Arzner movie called Dance Girl Dance, or something like Busby Berkeley's Dames. Like, those would be just the only kinds of films early on that I haven't seen from the list. If the completion percent was something like 95 for the first 100, and then it starts approaching the norm of something like 85 for a while, but then when it comes to the most recent films on the list, some viewers might be surprised that I haven't seen films like Inside Out by Peter Docter. I haven't seen Green Room by Jeremy Saulnier or Creed by Ryan Coogler or Todd Haynes' Carol or Whiplash or What We Do in the Shadow or the Lego Movie or David Fincher's Gone Girl or Alex Garland's Ex Machina, for instance. Those are films that should be fairly easily available. I haven't been watching movies recently, so I've missed some fairly big recent releases, for instance. So some people might be shocked as to why I haven't watched Alex Garland's Ex Machina. I just haven't. I haven't even considered watching it. Because what's the rush? Like, if it's a great movie, then I'll have a great movie to watch later on, but I'm not in any kind of rush. So, unfortunately, the most recent titles, because I sort of started losing, or I don't know if losing interest in cinema is quite it, but in around 2011, I remember that I started checking out of cinema. So I started being more interested in all of the other art forms around then, and my interest in cinema was at an all-time low. So that's why there is sort of a situation that some of the films, I went to see Miss Bala in the theaters, and I went to see Midnight in Paris in the theaters, but then it was just around that time, so I haven't seen Cabin in the Woods, I haven't seen The Raid Redemption, I haven't seen Berberian Sound Studios or Holy Motors or some of those others. So that 2011 is sort of where I start checking out of cinema, and then as a result I haven't seen Soderbergh's Magic Mike or Blue Jasmine by Woody Allen or Pavel Pavlikovsky's Ida or Stephen Knight's Locke, for instance. So that 2011 is where I started checking out of cinema, and as a result, perhaps that completion percentage is looking rougher than it should. So by my counting, I've seen something like 772 out of the 1,000 that Edgar Wright had, and perhaps some viewers think that that kind of 77% situation that it's acceptable, but I don't think so. So if I had seen all of those more recent films like Inside Out or Gone Girl or whatever, it would fairly effortlessly get to the 800 mark, and I wouldn't be very satisfied with that 800 mark either, because I would feel like I should have seen all of the Quatermass movies, and I should have seen all of the Roger Corman movies that I just haven't really had a chance to watch. There were lots of some films like the Twilight Zone movie with John Landis, Steven Spielberg, Joe Dante, and George Miller. I can't believe that I've never seen that. Those are the kinds of selections that bother me. I can't believe that I haven't seen Neil Jordan's The Company of Wolves, or Sam Raimi's Crime Wave, or John Landis's Into the Night. Like, those are the ones that bother me, which is why I can't accept 800 as some sort of a title. So, it should be something closer to 870 if I just had availability to some of the films like the Twilight Zone movie or those others that I named. So 870 would be something that I could sort of accept. That 870 would be good. 770 is kind of weak, but we'll have to go with it because it's all I could manage. But then when I started thinking of if I would make my own top 1000, how many titles would I share with Edgar Wright? And basically, I devised this kind of an let's say metric with the top 1000 is that because there's ultimately 3 tiers of favorites that could conceivably make it to the top 1000. There's the first tier of biggest personal favorites, the second tier of movies that are uncomplicatedly admired, and then the third tier of movies that are as it were impersonal favorites. So some movies like I'll try to come up with an example. I'd say that Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I'm trying to be cute with the idea that it has the word third in the title, but Close Encounters of the Third Kind would be the kind of impersonal favorite that I would put in the third tier. Or Buñuel's That Obscure Object of Desire. I quite like the movie, but it's not a personal favorite, so it would be in the third tier. Or Love and Death by Woody Allen, or Bugsy Malone by Alan Parker, or why not even Assault on Precinct 13 by John Carpenter. Like, those could be the kinds of movies that would be on the third tier of, let's say, impersonal favorites. And so, basically, this idea that I had is that if I created a top 1000 list, I would imagine that the first tier would have something like 100 titles, maybe 150, 170. So the first tier obviously would be insufficient to fill out the whole 1000. And then the second tier would probably have something like 400 or 500, at most 700 titles. So even the first and second tier would be insufficient to fill out the whole top 1000. But then the problem is that the third tier would be by far the biggest of those tiers of films that could conceivably make it in the top 1000. So if, let's say for the sake of argument, that the third tier could be something like 1400 as its size, so that if half of the movies from some well-regarded directors could at least make it into the tier number 3, then obviously pretty quickly, when you realize just how many movies people like Akira Kurosawa and Alfred Hitchcock and John Ford and even Steven Spielberg. Just how many movies they have, it pretty quickly starts filling up. So what happens is that if I would, for instance, have my top 3 tiers would have some sort of combined long list of like 2100 or 2200 titles. Well, obviously that would be much too much for a top 1000. So the problem is that the top 2 tiers can't fill it, and then the 3rd tier fills it into overflow. So that's what creates a difficulty for me to do my own top 1000, which I could accept the idea of doing it. Basically because of the reason why, when I'm looking at the Edgar Wright top 1000 list, why I like the idea of it is that there's something like, the story of Edgar Wright's personal taste in there. So, if I look at the titles from 389 to 404, the Pam Grier film Coffee, Truffaut's Day for Night, Deathline, Don't Look Now, Electroglide in Blue, Flesh for Frankenstein, High Plains Drifter, Live and Let Die, Magnum Force, Mean Streets, well, it's not fun for me to just read out titles that some mightn't recognize, but Brian De Palma's sister and well, there's a stress of some fairly obscure films, but the idea that Edgar Wright top 1000 list, it's so drastically different from the They Shoot Pictures, Don't They top 1000, or Jonathan Rosenbaum's top 1000 favorite films list, in that if all of those, well, They Shoot Pictures, because it's not compiled by one person, but it's some sort of it's the consensus choice between multiple different lists. It doesn't really count, but anyway, just the idea that there's like a story of different kinds of tastes in cinema being told in just the top 1000, because a top 10 or a top 100 can sort of, if Edgar Wright made his top 100 movies, I don't think Coffee or High Plains Drifter or Electroglide in Blue or even De Palma's Sisters, I don't know that those would make the cut. So that's why a top 100 can still be sort of, it's difficult to have too much uniqueness in that, you do frequently see a lot of the same movies in there. So like some people have The Godfather in there, and the first Star Wars, and Taxi Driver and whatever. So like those are pretty typical favorites. So basically the strength in a top 1000, if I'm guessing that Magnum Force, for instance, by Edgar Wright could never make a shorter list, or Deathline, for instance, might never make a shorter list. So like the strength in a top 1000 is that you start to see where individuality starts getting formed, in that to me the whole point of a top 1000 is that you can't be generic. They Shoot Pictures, Don't They achieve it, but only because it is compiled by those shorter lists where the people are listing their favorites that are like Casablanca, Citizen Kane, Vertigo, Godfather, the Apu trilogy, and so on. Abel Gance's Napoleon and whatever. So like it's different. Like films like Magnum Force obviously have very little chance of making it in the They Should Pictures consensus list, and that's why that idea of seeing the unique taste being formed by the 1000 list just being too big for merely generic titles. So if I would make my own top 1000, the whole point, like I obviously wouldn't, or obviously, but I wouldn't put Magnum Force in there. I probably wouldn't, like, out of those 389 to 404, the only one that I could certainly, like, without any doubt, Paper Moon by Peter Bogdanovich would be in there. But with all of those others, like, I don't know, like that Oh Lucky Man movie by Lindsay Anderson, that would be one of those films in the third tier, where if the third tier would be something like 1200 entries, and only a third of that could make the list. Like Oh Lucky Man would be just there as one of those difficult choices of whether to put it in there or not. Perhaps, I feel pretty confident in saying that Serpico, Don't Look Now, and Day for Night, they wouldn't make it in. They would all probably be in the third tier, and I can't imagine them making it, and then basically the difficulty in the top 1000, why I can only sort of promise the idea of doing it eventually, and why I want to do it is to try and do a non-generic list that would be unlike anyone else's list. It's not a case that like some people might think that it's easier making a top 1000 and top 100 because they would think that you don't need to cut anything, you can just throw all of your favorites in there. Like some younger film buffs might think that the longer the list, the less cutting you need to do, but that's not how I view it, because to me the top 100 would be the easiest, because like it's easier understanding favorites in the shorter context of a top 100, because those would be all top tier favorites, and then the difficulty would be in how many Akira Kurosawa movies do I have in a top 100. So like it would be really easy to whether it's 5 or 7, it's like then what are the 2 Kurosawa movies that won't make the cut and whatever. So like the choices in the top 100 are really easy. The choices in the top 1000, like with that Oh Lucky Man entry by Lindsay Anderson, for instance, like that would be a really difficult choice, and that's why I can't promise of doing a top 1000 very quickly. But anyway, I counted those Edgar Wright selections of how many first or second tier choices I would have, and I counted something like 189. So that there's 189 films that are like Barry Lyndon, or All the President's Men, or The Spy Who Loved Me, or Days of Heaven, or Death on the Nile, which is an interesting favorite to share, and The 36th Chamber of Shaolin, and Apocalypse Now, Alien, Manhattan, Empire Strikes Back, The Blues Brothers, The Stuntman, Blade Runner, The Thing by John Carpenter, for instance. So, like, there was 189 films, but I could say without any shadow of a doubt that yes, they would all be on a top 1,000. I'd say that there's not necessarily, like, unless you, dear viewer, think that it's that there's something peculiar about sharing some fairly mainstream titles, ultimately, like the 1978 Death on the Nile, or the James Bond movie The Spy Who Loved Me, for instance. Like, perhaps this would be the kind of quirky, interesting similarities with my list and Edgar Wright's, and then some other films like Sam Raimi's The Quick and the Dead, or A Chinese Ghost Story, or if I would have Tremors in the, I don't know, like, or Rikio, The Story of Ricky, like, those would be third tier titles, but anyway, Carlitos Way by Brian De Palma, Hal Hartley's Amateur, Kieslowski's Tricolos, like, there were titles like that throughout the list where I could very easily just say that yes, that, and that. There isn't a lot of thinking that needs to be done with me, whether something like Pulp Fiction or Chungking Express or Three Colors Red or Michael Mann's Heat, for instance, whether those would be on my list, I could say without any shadow of a doubt that there were 189 selections that Edgar Wright had that I would also have. Obviously that 189 isn't a whole lot to go by, in that, obviously then there would be some huge personal favorites that I have that Edgar Wright just hasn't on his list. So, as I suggested, I think that I could make it, like, if I just was rather liberal on the first tier and the second tier, and I tried to count it as generously as possible, I think that I could potentially expand it to all the way to something like 700 titles. Because the reason why I say liberally is because if we think of some films that I haven't seen in years, so something like Alexei German's Checkup on the Roads, or Why Has Bodhidharma Left for the East, or George Sidney's Kiss Me Kate, for instance. I haven't seen those in years, so how certain can I really be, of whether Alexei German's Checkup on the Roads, whether that's the second tier or third tier? In all honesty, it should be a third tier, but I remember liking it a lot. So, like, if I was really liberal with the first and second tier, perhaps I could expand it to 200 in that all of those films that I named, like, if I would put them at the tail end of the second tier, maybe I could get it to all the way to something like 700, but that would still leave 300 films where I'm totally unsure whether they belong on the list or not. And I'm sure Edgar Wright had had a somewhat similar situation, that the third tier of the long list movies where you needed to somehow evaluate them, like, that probably must have been the biggest group, and the differences must have been completely negligible. So something like John Woo's A Better Tomorrow, or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or Carl Reiner's The Man with Two Brains, or Paul Verhoeven's The Fourth Man, for instance. Those might be all the kinds of, or Sidney Pollock's Tootsie, those might be all the kinds of titles where I'm just totally unsure whether they should make the list or not. I don't know. Sometimes the problem is that I haven't seen the movies in such a long time, or if I've seen films recently, like The Fourth Man by Paul Verhoeven, I just, like, you know, The Fourth Man is basically the same film as Basic Instinct. So Paul Verhoeven essentially remade it in America. There's some minor differences, but it's essentially the same film. So, like, if there was a choice between putting Basic Instinct or The Fourth Man, like, I certainly wouldn't put both in there. I don't know if I should put either. Perhaps I might consider it, because I basically like Paul Verhoeven. The Flesh and Blood movie with Rutger Hauer, like, that might be the kind of, interesting choice that might, I would probably think that might make it as one of the last entries, and then that might get me to not put some other Paul Verhoeven movies. So The Fourth Man probably couldn't make it, but, like, the strangeness is, like, trying to fill those last 300 spots, for instance. That's why I'm only talking in sort of hypotheticals, that if I made a list and if something would be in there. But I went and counted, and 189 were something that were either top tier or solidly in the second tier. I feel like that's a decent overlap with Edgar Wright. Like, some people might disagree, some people might want some sort of a 500 entry overlap or whatever, but, like, I would just, if there was such massive overlap between me and Edgar Wright's list, I would just flat out say that I'm not doing my list if it would be so interchangeable with Edgar Wright's. And if you'd say that I had seen something like 800 titles and there's 200 that I still haven't seen, well, I would basically be shocked if out of the 200 that I haven't seen, if more than 20 would make my list. Like, I would be downright shocked. So I don't see any major personal favorites still being added. So I can't see me and Edgar Wright sharing more than 220 to 230 titles, even if I had seen every one of his top 1,000. I have to speak in hypotheticals because, like, this kind of situation of looking at some of the films in here, in like Werner Herzog's Agir, The Wrath of God. I haven't seen it in over a decade. Monte Hellman's Two-Lane Blacktop, I haven't seen it in over a decade. I haven't seen Woody Allen's Bananas in ages. I haven't seen Zabriskie Point in ages. I haven't seen Robert Altman's MASH in ages. I haven't seen Dario Argento's The Bird with Crystal Plumage in ages. I haven't seen Godard's Weekend in about a decade. So, like, there's lots of films where it's absolutely impossible for me to say right now if some of those films would be in the third tier, for instance. Like, whether they would make the cut or would not make the cut, it's just difficult. And you might say that if there were some films that I named like Godard's Weekend or whatever it is that Godard's Weekend or Zabriskie Point or Bananas or whatever, like could some of them make the list if I just rewatch them and like them enough to put in the, well, no, not really, because like ultimately the toughest competition that Weekend by Godard would face is from other Godard movies. The toughest competition that Bananas by Woody Allen would face is from other Woody Allen movies. The toughest competition by Aguirre from Herzog would face is from other Herzog movies. So I can basically say with a fair amount of certainty that there's no way that any of them would make it. So no, the overlap between my list and Edgar Wright's wouldn't exceed something like 230. I think that if I had seen all of the films from the Edgar Wright Top 1000 that I wanted to see, if I could get my total up from 770 to 870, I could see the overlap ultimately becoming something like 230. And I would be very satisfied with it. And I just want to stress, the only reason why I would make my list is if the overlap isn't greater. So, if there's some other top thousands like Jonathan Rosenbaum's, like, it's only if I can keep the overlap down. I'm not trying to maximize the overlap, I'm trying to minimize it. So I'm not leaving any personal favorites out, like Two-Lane Blacktop, for instance, it's not a personal favorite. Vanishing Point is sort of closer to a personal favorite, and then the French Connection is there somewhere in the middle where it's not exactly a personal favorite, but I do sort of admire it quite a bit. But like the Vanishing Point would certainly be on my list. French Connection probably would be left outside looking in, or alternatively it would be one of the very last selections made. And then Two-Lane Blacktop, I can't entirely see it, not because I would have anything against it. Again, it would just start facing such tough competition from the other films on the long list. So, for instance, some viewers might be like WTF if they hear me talk about some big classics that I just can't see making the cut, is that if there's some 5 fairly similar movies, so if I'm looking at Clute, for instance, by Alan J. Pakula, there Clute definitely isn't making my list. It's not because I have anything against it, but if there's some fairly similar films from roughly that era, where there's like a Blow Up by Antonioni, Blow Out by Brian De Palma, The Conversation by Coppola, a Czechoslovakian movie called The Ear, which is a rough equivalent of The Conversation, or, well, I mean, it's sort of there in the ballpark, and then Clute, for instance. If there's like 5 films that are sort of similar-ish, I realize that Antonioni is sort of the odd one out in that bunch, but if there's 5 films that are sort of similar-ish, and they are there on the long list, and many of them are like third-tier favorites, I can't put all of those 5 films in. It's just like Basic Instinct and Fourth Man, they are basically the same film. Like Blow Up and Blow Out, they are sort of too similar. Coppola's Conversation and the Czechoslovakian The Year, they are too similar. So I can't have all of them in. So there's 5 films and I have to choose 2, and I would choose Antonioni's Blow Up and Coppola's The Conversation as their kind of second-tier favorites. And, it's not meant to be any kind of indictment of Brian De Palma's Blowout, saying that it's not good enough to make the cut. It's just that, the top 1000 can only house 1000 movies, and some similar titles must be, expendable. Like, there are so many spaghetti westerns by Sergio Corbucci, or samurai films from Masaki Kobayashi, where the similarity creates the kind of situation that some Masaki Kobayashi film that could conceivably miss, well, no, I'm probably not having any high-profile omissions from Kobayashi. Well, with spaghetti westerns, for instance, like some of the spaghetti westerns that could miss the cut, it's only because they are facing such tough competition from other spaghetti westerns, so that they could conceivably be the situation that I would admire some spaghetti western that didn't make the cut, perhaps even more that some film that did make the cut, but I didn't want to go too crazy on sort of similar films. So like there could be so many Shaw Brothers movies or Chinese wuxia movies in there, and samurai films, spaghetti westerns, for instance. So like, you know, because there's only a finite amount of spots, you sort of need to create a kind of situation that if some films are roughly the same, then you know, they just end up being on the outside looking in, and it's not meant to be any kind of major criticism of those films. It's just that you know, that's how that list making process works. So basically, you know, if my first and second tier was just big enough to be the top 1,000 entirety, I could make the list even fairly quickly. But because of the difficulty with the third tier, the difficulty between having some fairly interchangeable favorites, so that, you know, something like Krzysztof Kieślowski's Tricolor's Red, it really separates itself. Or Kieślowski's Double Life of Veronique, it really separates itself. But then some earlier Kieślowski films like Blind Chance or Camera Buff, those really don't separate themselves. So those are the kinds that I'm having almost an impossible time evaluating whether Blind Chance should be in there, because I haven't seen it in enough years. So if there's you know, if there's some sort of a situation of that or Theo Angelopoulos's Eternity and a Day, I haven't seen it in enough years to make any kind of evaluation whether Eternity and a Day should be in there or not. So because of that, third tier is creating such problems. I don't want to put films where I'm not 100% sure that they belong there. So like something like Monte Hellman's Two Lane Blacktop, I'm not even 10% sure. I haven't seen it recently enough. So I have to speak in hypotheticals, because I don't know when I can promise that I would have rewatched enough of those movies where I could feel comfortable thinking that it is actually an accurate representation of my own cinematic taste. But anyway, you know, even though I greatly like Edgar Wright, I greatly like his list, the only reason why I would do my list is because of me being very happy in, you know, somehow differing from Edgar Wright's list, having enough happy differences that there would be some sort of a point for a more unique taste, a unique take on the cinematic taste that hopefully would be unlike any other list that either is there or could be there. But anyway, like I'll just be honest. I've ever since 2011, I haven't been very interested in cinema, at least compared to the extent that I used to be. So recently, partly to my shock, for the first time in my life, I started getting passionate about Finnish cinema. So if, for instance, here is a completely random sampling of filmmaking from Finland. it, honestly, it's only the idea of basically being the only kind of international list that would have a high quantity of Finnish films there throughout the list. I couldn't help notice that Edgar Wright had quite a high amount of British films, either Hammer horror or stuff like With Nala Nyart and Shane Meadows or films like that. So Edgar Wright, he had quite a high amount of British films, and that is what is partly creating sort of a unique ambience to his list. I think that if I could have enough Finnish films, something in the range of between 50 and 70, and it might shock some people, but it shocked me to what an extent. For instance, the screwball comedies that Finland was producing in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it shocked me how much to what extent I thought that some William Marcus directed movies were sort of, almost as good as some Preston Sturges movies or Leo McCarey movies. So, it basically, if I would have the only list with that amount of Finnish movies, would basically ultimately make it interesting for me to see whether you could keep the kind of international tonality to the list with the Finnish films just there as, some Aki Kaurismäki movies later on, and then some slightly more rare, like some rare silent films, and then some fairly standard historical films from the 50s and 70s and whatever that would play there, being next to all the Visconti and Bertolucci movies of the international scene. So, ultimately, just me wanting to add some Finnish titles to the international canon would basically be the last motivation that I would need to make the to want to make the top 1,000 list. But the difficulty is that with some titles like Michael Powell's and Emmerich Pressburger's I Know Where I'm Going, I haven't seen it recently enough. I have no idea whether it's low second tier or a mid third tier movie, and I would need to rewatch some films like that to know where to put it, and then I couldn't feel comfortable with the list before that, I don't know when I can promise that I'll have enough of some of those borderline films rewatched so that I could feel comfortable with doing the list. But anyway, I think that the first point is to just have the sort of bigger first and second tier long list, which would probably be something like 700 titles, and then just to if I start sort of quickly, like I won't be in any rush, but perhaps if I can just little by little keep adding titles to it, perhaps at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, I will have some kind of a top 1,000 where I feel like I gave enough of the movies that I haven't seen recently a chance. Then I can feel comfortable publishing it. But anyway, if some viewers can't believe that I'm unsure about whether such and such a movie. You know, since I have some DVDs here in front of me, like how about something like Oberst Redel by Ivan Szabo, like or Marketta Lazarova by František Vlachil, or The Duel by Andrew Law, or In the Soup by Alexander Rockwell, or Iron Sky, or Where Do We Go Now, or Caramel, or another Ivan Szabo movie called Hanusen, or a couple of Jack Arnold movies like It Came From Outer Space, or Tarantula. Like to me, it's not so simple to just say whether something is either an obvious yes or an obvious no, and basically the toughest films from those that I named are those where there's something ambiguous whether they are low second tier or mid third tier. So something like Alexander Rockwell's In the Soup, or Marketta Lazarova, for instance. Like I would want to put them into the top 1,000, but it just sort of depends on how tough the challenge around them is. So with František Vlachil, I'd imagine that he has 2 films in the top 1,000, Valley of Peace and Marketta Lazarova. So I'm imagining that it's there. I would want to put In the Soup in there, but basically if some other independent films from the eras that having too much competition, then I don't know. And then, these kinds of Oberst Redel movies, like, this is a good example of the kind of film that I wouldn't know what to say about this, because I can't even remember whether I've seen this. I think I haven't seen Hanusen, but I've seen this when I was a teenager, but I remember very little of it. So I have no idea with films like this. Do they belong anywhere near the list or no? So that's why I feel like I need to do a bit of rewatching, and then as much as I would like to put a maximum amount of Asian films like The Duel, for instance, I don't know if there's a spot enough there. So ultimately it is actually quite difficult to make the call. If the long list of the 3 tiers is something like 2,100, I guess you just have to start cutting so much that films like this don't have any realistic chance of getting in, and perhaps even a film like this won't have. And then to the delights of the Irish murderers of the world, if he has to are both of these films by Middle Eastern female directors? I can't remember exactly right now, but like this would be just the kind of Irish murderer choices where some kinds of audiences won't forgive if they are not on the list. But unfortunately, that's just it's easier to just lump films to the long list, but then when you need to make the cuts, if you can't watch whether Orson Welles can have more than 5 entries, perhaps around 5 is what he probably would have, then if somebody like Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg, if they would have around 5 or 7 as well, like obviously some fairly big classics would miss the cut, and that's just the essence of ultimately doing the list. But anyway, I would imagine that the the ratios would probably go something like 550 what to English speakers are foreign films, and something like 450 English language films. And out of that 450 would probably be something like 370 American films and something like 80 British films or international co-productions or Australian, New Zealandese films or whatever. So probably something like 370 Hollywood films or American films, and yeah, you know, I don't know, something like maybe around 200 Asian films. I'm not counting animation. Like animation films won't be included in this. So probably around 200 Asian films, probably around 300 European films, and you know, I actually made a top 100 French films list, and I think I can pretty comfortably say that something like that top 100 French films list that I did, I can use as reference, and I can pretty comfortably say that there would be something like 75 French films in there, and then some, you know, like not all of those 100 can make it, and France has one of the better film scenes in Europe, and it has lots of work by non-French directors such as Louis Buñuel, Andrzej Chulavsky, Raul Ruiz, Aki Kaurismäki, Jules Dessin, for instance, he's Rififi. That non-French directors are coming and making French cinema very internationally attractive. Max Ophuls, born in Germany, people forget. But anyway, you know, around 75 French films, probably around 300 European films, and then maybe around 50 films from Latin America and Africa and Middle East and whatever. Like, I guess mostly, you know, some Iranian films would bump up the totals a bit, and yeah, you know, those are sort of probably like you know, what to expect from the list is like probably around 370 Hollywood films, probably around 200 Asian films, where you know, the golden age of Japanese cinema with Kurosawa, Ozu, Mizoguchi, Japanese New Wave, you know, Asian like Chinese Kung Fu and you know, Shaw Brothers films, wuxia films, and whatever, like, you know, stuff like that, and yeah, I can sort of see already what the final list looks like, because I have made some lists as a teenager, so you know, that kind of you know, caught somewhere between Max Ophul's classics and then Shaw Brothers Kung Fu films, and I guess something like that would become the tonality on the list. And yeah, like I just like Edgar Wright said, I would want to make that for personal reference, and you know, to recommend some films that I like for this. But because I would want it for personal reference, I don't just want to hastily throw something together. And, you know, like, if I just happen to have films like this with me, I don't just want to assume that, oh, you know, like half of those make it. Like, you know, like, this bunch will be lucky if they have one or two. And so, because I want to do it right, I'm gonna take my time. So I don't want to promise doing it too quickly. But, you know, perhaps I can arrange it for eventually on this channel. But anyway, I just wanted to sort of talk a bit around that Edgar Wright Top 1000 and how it is that my list might have similarities, perhaps around 189 or 230. similarities and you know how it is that my list must slightly differ from it. But anyway, those were some of my thoughts about it, and I thank everyone for watching, and I hope you liked it. And anyway, so bye bye.